child labor. You certainly draw the attention that grave human rights violations could also be caused by this kind of data mining and the use of illicit use of data. Now, the question is, what could be done about it? And I wonder whether the ideas which have been developed against against abuse of international business in the United Nations Guiding Principles for Human Rights, the idea that a business is obliged by law to set up internal structures, internal monitoring structures to ensure due diligence for not having a negative impact on others' rights. But this idea couldn't also be made fruitful for the problem you are raising. Because after all, it's a matter that these companies, let's say big tech data processing companies, are using in a law-free zone. In the European Union, we are about to legislate about due diligence obligations for companies with regard to human rights. Couldn't that also be a path for countering the use of big data, the abuse of big data?
Yeah, I think Europe has a massive role here because basically Europe is a leader on these sorts of rights. I remember working at Yahoo where there's a European law that basically said, if you're a citizen of this country, we don't want you to just, arbitrarily pipe this data from so-and-so's account over country lines. And it meant that we actually set up our server architecture differently in order to go do that. And so there were real changes inside of the corporation in order to go and meet, European law. And honestly, I think y'all should pass more laws like that. I don't know if you're the people that are in the position or related to policymakers or, have their ear in any way. But honestly, if you passed more laws like that, it would show, well, number one, the tech companies would comply because they don't want to just sit out of Europe as a market, right? It's just too big a market to sit out of the entire continent. That's ridiculous. So it means that they will build the capability for that level of control around privacy and rights and all that sort of thing. And then they have no excuse in any other part of the world. Because it's like, well, we know you can do it. You did it for Europe. It's literally the same code, literally the same stuff. Maybe actually our OpEx was more expensive in Europe for those laws. But, whatever, our margins were still fantastic, right? It's like in tech, it's the difference between having an 80% margin and a 76% margin. And you're like, sure, wouldn't you like 80 over 76? Yeah, okay, fine. But is that difference the sort of thing where it's like, oh, are you willing to sit out Europe in order to make sure that you have an 80% margin everywhere? Or would you be fine having a 76% margin and having Europe as a potential market? Almost everybody is going to choose the thing of having Europe as a potential market. So I honestly think that because Europe is thinking a bit, well, they've both done more historically and they are thinking about this in a more aggressive way, that you guys have a fundamentally, deep opportunity and I don't want to say responsibility because it's really everybody's responsibility, but people aren't stepping up to the responsibility. So you guys are closer to being able to step up to the responsibility. Because do you think it's going to happen from China? Do you think it's going to happen from the US, honestly? I don't think so. If it was going to happen, it would have happened by now. So, and when we did do changes, it was in response to your laws, actually. So, yeah, do that, and then we can have the larger conversation. Do that, and then go to the UN, and then say, this should be the law everywhere, because clearly the tech companies can do it. They just did it for 1 billion people in Europe.
Thank you, Tom. In fact, if I may say so, Peter has been for many years the legislative expert of the Constitutional Affairs Committee of the European Parliament. So if there is somebody in contact with legislators, then definitely it's him. Maybe he will tell us more in another occasion. Now I'm happy to give the floor to Pierantonio Rizzo, who is a European Affairs Manager at GSMA. And it's time to hear the voice of the company world.
Yeah, thank you very much, Susanna. Thank you, Tom, actually, for this very interesting debate. What I maybe want to just add one comment, which I think summarized many of the interventions that we heard today. It is, I think there is a sort of misconception, whether we as a, let's say, user of a platform, we are simply users or we are customers. Because of course, if we put it in a perspective of pure customers and you look at Facebook or Google just as an online marketplace, then of course you don't see a harm in seeing the result of your search displayed and also the day further. But then, as mentioned also by Stefania, if you go in a broader sense, so we are not just simple let's say customers, but digital citizens of this platform, if you want, then you go and see that they are also able to shape in a way the political opinion of people, and that of course goes in the different debate, which in a way, and that links to my question, which is, I mean, making your point that you've made of the example of YouTube, dropping the illegal, for instance, content that have been uploaded on their website. Do you see as a potential solution, I mean, the idea that certain of these big tech have a sort of editorial responsibility for the content that are displayed? Because there is quite of a difference if you talk about a content which is illegal from a content that can lead to disinformation. Because I mean, content that are harmful then of course are not necessarily illegal, and therefore when you enter this debate, then you risk to really limit the freedom of speech of users, considering also that many of the content that are there are actually not posted by newspaper but also by users themselves. So how do you find then strike a balance between these needs for freedom of speech on one end and maybe assigning more, let's say, duty of care or more responsibility to these platforms? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to say you got to go parse out the different places where the responsibility exists. So there is a set of people that uploaded it in the first place, and a bunch of them actually knew for a fact that this was misinformation, right? And yes, there actually should be legal recourse for, against those folks. And then, the platform's responsibility is, look, there's lots of people uploading every kind of thing. But as the owner or as the operator of the platform, the big tech companies as the operator of the platform, we have a responsibility not to massively magnify, the reach of folks that are doing things that are damaging to society. Now, that's a little bit different than what we think about as editorial, but maybe if you basically say like editorial in like the broadest sense of the word, you could think about that as a type of algorithmic editorial. In practice, real editorial means that story would never run, actually. So like, this type of algorithmic editorial means that, well, if the algorithms work right, then maybe it'll only get 1,500 views instead of 2 million views, right? Now, going back to, we actually saw this happen after the U.S. election, and the Dominion voting systems company started suing all these media outlets. And all of a sudden, these folks that had been just wildly saying untrue things, suddenly were like, oh, no, we can't say that anymore. And that's basically, taking the issue to the people that are generating and propagating. Because like those folks both generated those lies and then they massively propagated those lies. And as soon as that there was any sort of negative control, like Dominion Voting Systems put a $1.3 billion lawsuit against them. And all of a sudden they're like, blip, we're going to start telling the truth now. And it's like, okay, well, even the tiniest bit of accountability. So let's say like you can upload whatever you want to YouTube, right? But if you actually happen to upload illegal content that might hurt people's lives, then there should be a punishment or a fine, right? And I think that would already start to change people's minds. It's like $10,000 fine on the first offense, repeated offense, 100,000 fine and up. And it's like, oh, a lot of people that are just like these home folks are going to ask themselves the questions like, am I uploading something that's true right now? Because am I uploading something that's dangerous? They would have a second thought, because $10,000 is enough for most people to be like, I don't want to just randomly burn $10,000. That's dumb, right? So like even a small thing like that, even if it was only enforced 1% of the time, it would completely change the landscape of what was being uploaded. And then, of course, amongst what's being uploaded, then the tech companies have a huge amount of responsibility on what's being amplified.
Yeah, but then the question, sorry if I may, but then the question would be, who is that? Before that said the news becomes viral, right? Then who's the arbiter that decides that the news should be removed from there? Is that platform itself doesn't give too much power, extreme power, I would say, to the platform itself to decide what content should be there, what content constitutes, let's say, disinformation or not?
I mean, I alluded to it before, but like the power needs to be shared, you know, and the responsibility needs to be shared. Like a number of the things that are being uploaded are literally illegal in all contexts. Like hate speech is illegal in the U.S. So like to go and hate crimes are illegal, right? So it's like no, the government should actually enforce it. That's not even, you know, Twitter's law or Facebook's law or Google's law. That's U.S. law at least, right? And of course, different countries, whatever, you got slightly different law. But like, no, make a real penalty, because that's actually the nation's law. Go in there and make it a real penalty, as opposed to like, well, it's this whole tech thing. Let's all try to take on the multi-billion-dollar Titan before we can tweak anything. No, like the government could actually do this tomorrow. They could be like, you know what's illegal? You know, hate crimes. And all these videos you post, they led to these hate crimes. You know, you're going to jail, or here's a $10,000 fine. And we're watching now. Like, we're going to watch your channel now. You're on the list. So the next time you post one, it's another $10,000 fine. Let's see how many more videos you post. Like, that's just illegal by U.S. law. Like, we don't even need to go make new policies and because I know tech people, you know, tech company lawyers too. They're probably better than government lawyers. Like, so if you basically want to say like, oh, we're going to take it on, we're going to win in court, and the tech companies, you probably won't. And you actually don't necessarily even need that. You already have laws that you can enforce. And by the way, this stuff is public. It's naturally public, because its danger is that it's public and being amplified. So it's not even like one of these crimes where it's like, oh, we hid under cover of so-and-so, and it was so hard to know that we're doing something illegal. It's right there. So yeah, we should just sweep in there. And like, look, by whatever, fine 1% of them $10,000, almost all of it will stop next week.
So that's possible for hate speech or for racist speech, but fake news in themselves are not illegal. Not illegal. It's not in our systems. So that's an interesting point. I mean, maybe we need different laws. Maybe we need some kind of evaluation. Who could evaluate that?
Like, remember the root of why we created freedom of speech was to be able to speak truth to power. Now, what we are now twisting that into is we are now amplifying untruth, and we're making untruthful people extremely powerful. So this is obviously out of the spirit of why we created, you know, the First Amendment in the first place. And it's like, you can't just run undercover and just be like, oh yeah, no, it might have been created for this. I'm going to completely misuse it. But look at this, you know, look at the First Amendment. I'm totally in the right. It's like, no, you're not, man. Go and look at the historical context why we created a First Amendment. You are completely not in the right here. And what we might need is just a nuancing of that to be like, no, what we mean by the First Amendment is this. It's not the unlimited right for people to gain a huge amount of power by spreading untruths. Like, that is not the purpose of the First Amendment.
So the only category which comes to my mind is the abuse of law, for instance. But I don't want to abuse of your time.
Yeah, I got to go to another meeting now. Yeah.
Let me know if, you have to go now.
No, this is great. Thank you so much for the conversation. I think this is a very active area. The future is not written yet, so we can work on writing it together. And we really need to be paying attention to whose intentionality gets the most play, and does it match what we actually want? And I'll just say one other thing about this. I've been in tech for a long time. I worked at Microsoft Office way back in the early 2000s. And what we said when we were in Microsoft Office is like, man, everything's too complicated. It should take less time. We should make it so that your intentions become, you know, whatever you want in this Word document or, you know, Excel sheet or whatever. Your intention should, you know, manifest on the page really clearly, really sharply. And I created a metric for myself back then, which is the thing that is most important is the sanctity of a person's chain of thought. And what has happened now is the advertising world has got the opposite care. They're like, we don't care about your train of thought at all. Actually, I'm going to interrupt it 10 times in the next minute in order to get you to buy something. And it's like, man, how far have we fallen in that 20 years, right? Like, I was sitting there 20 years ago thinking about like, oh, how do we make software that truly values the sanctity of people's thoughts, is able to take, tools that take your intentions and allow you to go do those things, reliably, well, quickly, all that sort of thing. And now it's like, how do we get as many of your eyeballs for as many minutes as possible to get as many ad views in front of you? No, this is just the wrong set of intentions. And we got so much worse at this discipline in 20 years. So anyway, we can go, I don't know, maybe there's a software code of conduct too. Like, why are we software engineers? Just like civil engineers, don't make bridges that fall down every day. It's like, maybe there's something like that too. And I don't know what the form it'll take, but I do know that like the thoughts that, that are being shared today around how to make software seem fundamentally broken to the thoughts that, we were having 20 years ago about it, or even 20 years before that. I was honestly doing some software stuff, in the 90s and the late 80s too. Anyway, we totally messed it up. It's the worst it's ever been. Like back in the late 80s, you only wrote software if you loved it. And the people that were in it for that reason, like it was astounding that like what we could have created together if we kept those intentions, was a completely, different world that would have been a lot more positive. And at some point, some people started to make a lot of money, and the suits and tech bros and whatever, and now we have a culture which is not the culture and not the intentionality, and we're ruining it for everybody. So and as an old time techie, somebody who was like writing code in the 80s and 90s, it's like it's very disappointing.
Thank you. I wondered if we could reschedule a meeting in 6 months, 1 year, and come up with possible solutions or ideas, positive ideas on how we could regulate better this world of tech and having really democratic platforms. So it could be also sort
feel
of
free
an
to
idea
reach out.
contest.
Yeah, I definitely do need to jump though. So thank you so much for the conversation today.
Thank you so much for your time. And
okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
So I thank you all for having been with us. And we will have a second meeting on May 12. The topic will be the sustainability, planet Earth and sustainability, a conversation with futurists. So you are invited, and I will send out the link again. And bye-bye, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
See you.
Thank you, Susanna. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Thank you, Susanna. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.